Hello, it's Clive De Carle here with another episode of the Solutions Revolution. Thank you all very, very much for joining us. And today I'm very, very happy to invite Andrew Fletcher onto the show. And Andrew is an expert in inclined bed therapy. Now, if you haven't heard of this, it really is rather a magic thing. And I came across it, I don't know, something like 15 years ago, and I found, well, I love it. I really, really like it. But other people are experiencing huge benefits from a health perspective. So welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for that, Clive. It's not magic actually; it's science, and hopefully I can explain it in a way that it makes sense to everyone.
Excellent, thank you. So you discovered this about 20 years ago, I think.
Yes, it was rather an incredible journey. For example, who told humans that we should sleep on a flat bed?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So whenever I go camping, I'm always drawn to a very slight incline, so that my head is higher. And I've heard you say that animals generally sleep on an incline.
Yeah, if you look around the fields, if there's a hillside, you'll see cattle and sheep, and they'll all be facing uphill if they're lying down. Sheep seem to know a great deal about sleeping, and a great deal more than we do. If you look at chimpanzees in the wild, well, and in the zoo as well, in the wild they'll be up in nests, and the branches are not flat, and they tend to sleep with their head up. Gorillas will sleep resting up against a tree. The evidence is all there. You just have to learn to look around.
And of course, a lot of people used to sleep in chairs, didn't they, in the old days, quite often, as I understand it. I also understand that people used to have two sleeps a night quite often. So tell us some more about the inclined bed therapy and what it actually is, first of all, so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's simply raising the head end of the bed 6 inches or 15 centimetres if you're metrically inclined. And you raise the bed at the head end, causing the whole bed to slope down from head to toe. A lot of people make the mistake and say, oh, I've tried inclined bed therapy, it hasn't worked for me. And then when you dig around a little bit and ask a few questions, they tend to tell you that they've raised the upper half of the bed and had the legs flat, or they've got one of these newfangled electric beds. And some people have the knees up in the air on these electric machines. So they're not actually tried the inclined bed. Now, if you're sleeping with the bed folded in the middle, i.e. an electric bed, what you're doing is you're compressing the spine. If you're on an angled bed, then you're doing the exact opposite. You're decompressing the spine, but you're doing a great deal more as well. Because I worked out how gravity was driving the circulation in the body. A tall claim, I know, but if you listen up, you'll learn what I learned. If the literature states that gravity doesn't play a role in circulation because it acts equally on the blood flowing down as it does on the blood flowing up. Same with the lymphatic system, same with cerebrospinal fluid. But what they fail to take into account is that for every breath we take, we evaporate water from the lungs, and that water is donated by the blood that flows through the lungs. So as the blood flows through the lungs, it becomes denser on exiting. So that denser blood then passes through the heart and enters the main artery. So it's a bit like placing a pinch of salt at the top of the blood tree. And then gravity, if we're the right way around according to gravity, i.e. head up and feet down, standing, sitting correctly, gravity will pull on those density changes and drag on the blood, causing it to be pulled down, which gives the heart a bit of a boost. And it pulls the salts and the minerals through the kidneys a little bit more efficiently. And then the blood that passes through the renal system is less dense, having got rid of the salts that we excrete in the urine. So the blood flowing all up will always be more dilute than the blood flowing down. It's very simple, really. And the same applies to the lymphatic system, and the same applies to the cerebrospinal fluid. In fact, there's a paper just been published, and the guy attributes, he's done some temperature checks on the cerebrospinal fluid, and he's written a paper saying that the cerebrospinal fluid that flows down is always denser than the cerebrospinal fluid that returns back up.
Right, very interesting. And so this is going to presumably give your heart not only a rest, but I mean, my stepmother, for instance, died in her sleep of a heart attack. Had she have had an inclined bed, would she have stood a better chance, do you think?
Well, I'm just looking at my notes here, and one of the things I have to mention is that the medical profession actually know how harmful and how dangerous a flatbed is. In fact, all of the literature states that it's the last thing on earth you want to do is spend time in bed. And around 3:30 in the morning, the body temperature dips by 2 degrees. That is the time that most people will pass away in the sleep. Now, when my wife and I tested our mouth temperature in exactly the same manner that the graph was compiled in the literature, there was no 2-degree drop in our temperature. Our temperature stayed level. Well, you have peaks and troughs, but it didn't drop off the 2 degrees that the flatbed produced.
Oh, very interesting. And so, would you get long-term benefits to your heart? Presumably, you must do.
Yes, again, the heart rate was really important during the initial research. So I had 2 reliable volunteers, which were 2 bull terriers, fast asleep. They were lying horizontal, and I measured their heart rate, and then I got them to sleep. Well, it's not difficult getting a bull terrier to sleep. So I measured their heart rate while they were on an angle, and their heart rate and their respiration rate decreased. The heart rate decreased by 10 to 12 beats per minute, and the respiration rate decreased by 4 to 5 breaths per minute. So the next step was to see if the same applied to humans. So I measured my sons while they were asleep, and I measured my wife while she was asleep, and then she did the same for me. And we found, and this is really interesting, because our heart rate and our respiration rate decreased by exactly the same rate that the bull terriers had shown.
How interesting. So that should relate in the end to longer life, shouldn't it? If you're not.
I would presume so, but there's no claim for immortality with IBT, because there's one thing for sure is we will all die.
It appears that way, yeah.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating adventure. Another spin-off, which is pertinent to today's problems with the Ebola virus, is that a great deal of people have reported that they don't seem to get the infections that other people are getting, i.e. flu, coughs and colds. And if they do get them, they get over them within a very short space of time, when people around them are dropping like flies. And one important report came last year, which was from a granddaughter at nursery. The whole classroom had chickenpox, except she didn't.
Have you any explanation as to why that might be?
Yes, I have. For a virus to infect a cell, usually it infects through the fluids, it would require the fluids to stagnate or slow down in order for it to penetrate the cells. And I believe that if we keep that circulation running at its optimum level, then we can skip a lot of the infection. But also, the metabolic rate seems to have increased on the inclined bed because people with cold feet and poor circulation and cold hands suddenly find they've got nice, toasty, warm hands and feet. Now, viruses don't like increases in body temperature. In fact, that's our defense. Our body temperature goes up, we get a fever, and we manage to kill the virus or defeat the virus. And I've known for some time that if you think about what the statement was earlier about the flatbeds causing they can cause multiple organ failure, neurological damage, cause the bones to decalcify. And this is well known by the medical profession. But there's no research being done on what an inclined bed could do for these same people. And I believe that if the Ebola patients were not put on these flat beds, I reckon they would fare a damn sight better than they're doing now.
Well, that's very interesting. I wonder whether it's having an effect on the thyroid because, usually if the thyroid is low, people end up with cold hands and feet. That's one of the symptoms of a low thyroid function, probably because they've got low iodine.
Yeah, possibly because they've got low circulation as well.
Yes, yes. And what other sorts of benefits have you seen?
How many hours do we have?
2.
2 hours. I don't know where to start, really. I did a great deal of research with people with multiple sclerosis.
Really?
I had some phenomenal results with MS. I had an original pilot study whereby we had a small group of people with MS. Roger Kirk was the first guy to try the sloping bed, and Roger was in a very bad way. He couldn't walk. But Roger's improvements were incredible. So he came with me to it's a local chapter of King's Kerswell of the MS Society. And we got a group of people interested. Most people in the hall didn't receive the information that we were talking about and carried on business as usual, talking to each other. And I could tell that it wasn't striking any chords, but a small group of people did. And that small group of people suddenly started to improve. Incredible results. 2 ladies, one lady in Teignmouth and one lady in Paynton, both ophthalmologists wrote to me and asked me how could 2 blocks of wood under someone's bed restore someone's eyesight that was blind.
Wow.
Yeah. I had people walking that couldn't walk. Sensitivity came back. Bowel and bladder control came back where it was lost. But in that same pilot study, because I'd learned by now that the medical profession were a bit defensive and would go to extreme lengths to protect the status quo. I realised, and it had been said, that multiple sclerosis could fluctuate anyway, i.e. you can get relapse and remitting MS. So they could be having good days or bad days. But in fact, quite a few of the people on that study were progressive MS, which didn't fluctuate. But nevertheless, we included 2 patients with spinal cord injury. Now, it had been said that if one person with a complete spinal cord injury regained sensitivity and regained function, then that would be a major breakthrough and, it would be accepted. Well, actually, the first 2 people with spinal cord injury made incredible progress. Both got bowel and bladder control back. One gentleman who was tetraplegic developed the ability to write and could write his own name, his own address. When I met the guy, his hands were locked up in 2 fists. So he couldn't move his hands at all. He couldn't feel anything from the armpits down. And his kids used to dive all over him. And being a former boxer, the guy was, it was very frustrating that he couldn't defend himself and laughed it off most of the time. But all of a sudden, he was able to make, crazy progress. Sensitivity returned below the level of the injury. Sensitivity returned to his hands, to his feet. It was just incredible. And the other guy, John, he's passed away now. The guy got lung cancer. But his spine, according to Tromans and Grundy at Salisbury Spinal Unit, was smashed to smithereens. He'd fallen from a 2-story building and literally shattered his spine. And he was told that he would never be able to fend for himself. He would always be dependent on others. And lo and behold, he got a great deal of function back. His bladder, for instance, he told me the one day that he uses a bladder wash to flush out his urine, and he noticed that he was able to push the urine back up into the bladder bag. So he regained the ability to control his urine. But it's not just those two guys. There are more people with spinal cord injury that I've helped, and they've also reported very similar improvements. But back to MS, I tried to work out why these people with MS were having significant results. And I did a great deal of research into MS. And we've all heard about the myelin sheath, but not a lot of people have heard of the fact that myelin behaves exactly the same as liquid crystal in an LCD screen. And providing it's in its liquid state, it functions. Now, we've talked about circulation. If you can compromise circulation, i.e. cause those fluids to slow down or stagnate, then that circulation is compromised, and those crystals will no longer be liquid and become solid. And then once they become solid, they become visible under an MRI scan. So I suspect that the circulation increasing would have actually re-established the liquidity of this myelin. Are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, that's amazing. And I believe also people who are having to urinate at night, just because they believe they're getting old. I mean, actually, usually it's a nutrient deficiency, but they're also getting positive results and not needing to get up and pee. Is that right?
Yes, that was another report that we had many times. Is nocturia, I think the proper term is called, and infant bedwetting as well. That I've explained that the 2-degree temperature drop. If we feel cold, we need to urinate. But if we're not feeling cold, we don't need to urinate. And also, because we've increased the metabolic rate, evaporation is taking place more effectively from our lungs and from our skin. And if we're evaporating more water away, then there's less urine being produced. One caveat to that is that if someone has edema, i.e. they have swollen legs and swollen hands and swollen feet, now the medical profession will recommend raising your legs. Now that's great because that shifts the fluid from the lower limbs back into the trunk, but it doesn't actually push it back into the circulation. But the sloping bed does the opposite. If we raise the head end of the bed and lower the legs, then what we've seen time and time again is that excess fluid in the body is drawn back into the circulation through the venous return, whipped round the circulation, and then flushed out by the bladder. So initially, if someone has a great deal of fluid, they'll probably experience non-stop urination for quite some time.
How long would quite some time be?
Well, it can go on for 3 or 4 days. There was a guy over in Torquay, and when I met the guy, he was severely swollen. The chap had Parkinson's disease, and when I met him, his limbs were like giant water balloons. He couldn't walk, and the couple were struggling, trying to get him to the bathroom and back to his seat, and getting him upstairs was a nightmare. And we tilted the bed, and then over the course of a few days, his clothes literally fell on the floor. He'd lost that much fluid. His wife was ringing up frantic the one day, saying, "I don't know how to stop my husband from urinating." And yet all the time, the fluid was being drawn back into the circulation. And this was backed up by a guy called Peter Lewis, a vascular surgeon, because he did exactly the same. He'd heard about what had happened to this guy. I met Lewis at his home, along with another vascular surgeon called Celeste from Trinidad. And I explained all about the mechanics and how the body works and how the circulation fitted with the new theory. And he was fascinated, but he put me to the test because he had a problem with a lady with severely swollen body, and ascites, which is the abdominal cavity fills with fluid because of liver problems. And he went back to the hospital because he tried diuretics and nothing had worked. And when he came back, he said he couldn't believe the changes in the lady. He said it was incredible. He had never seen anything like it.
Well, it's good to hear that doctors are listening and paying attention.
Yeah, there's a great deal of a great deal of doctors now that are standing up and actually doing something with this. It's actually been published in a few doctors' books as well.
Oh, that's good. But I mean, the worst case of swollen legs that I've seen has been lymphedema.
Yes.
It would clear lymphedema, could it?
I would imagine it would. I've not come across a case of lymphedema yet. Elephantiasis is another good example of that. And I often thought that, these people that have got these huge problems with the legs would actually, right. My father was taken ill in hospital. He's passed away now. He had pancreatic cancer. And while he was in hospital on the flatbed, his legs were swelling up, and to the point where his pajamas had to be cut. I tried to lift one of his legs up, and I couldn't lift one of his legs up.
Wow.
His kidneys had packed up, his liver had packed up, and we were told it was a matter of hours before, my father would pass away, and he was in a coma. And I fought tooth and nail with the doctors and the nurses at Russell's Hall Hospital. And I was very, very stubborn and insisted that his bed was put on an angle. And every time I turned my back, they put the bed down flat again. And I got really angry with these people. But anyway, we tilted his bed, and within hours, the circulation had improved that much that the bloody urine that he was producing, the tar urine, ran clear and yellow. So his kidneys began functioning again. And over the course of a few days, the yellowness was going from his skin and his eyes. So his liver was functioning again. And he'd come out of a coma as well. And then he came home and had an extra 8 months of life.
Wow. Amazing.
Yes.
That's amazing.
That's my own father. Unfortunately, they did put a stent in because they told me that there was nothing that could be done for my dad. And I said, I'm going home to research this. And as soon as I got through the door, now that's a 200-mile journey, the phone rang and it was the doctor who said, we're putting a stent in for your dad. So there was a surgical procedure that could have been done, and yet they were trying to avoid it and deny it.
Stents, unfortunately, very seldom are as effective as they say.
Yes. So, the edema, but how does that work with the edema? Now, if we've got edema in the limbs, that's because the pressure in the venous return is greater than the pressure in the surrounding tissue. So, because of the semi-permeability of the veins, the fluid is being pushed by the pressure into the surrounding tissue. Now, when we tilt the bed, as I've said previously, we change the density of the blood, which in the arteries, which pass through the lungs. That arterial blood is then influenced by gravity and pulled upon, and that applies tension to every molecule in that blood, and that tension stretches back to the venous return, all the way back through the kidneys and back to itself. So affecting one molecule will have a chain effect and affect every molecule of blood in the body. Now, if we're applying a downward pressure by gravity to the arterial blood, which is dragging upon the density changes, we're applying tension to the venous return. And if we apply tension to the venous return, the blood starts to pull the walls in. Now, the first evidence for this happened very quickly. Within 4 weeks of tilting our bed, my wife's varicose vein went flat, and so did a nurse called Stephanie Ness. Her varicose vein went flat as well. And that proved to me that we'd nailed something very, very important. And if we apply tension, we're also increasing the positive pressure because of gravity in the arterial side. So we're increasing the arterial pressure, but for every action, there's always a reaction. We're decreasing the venous return pressure. Now we're lowering the pressure lower than the surrounding tissue. So now the fluids migrate from the surrounding tissue back into the veins, around the circulation, through the kidneys where they're filtered, and then the spent salts are excreted in the urine. And if you stand there at the toilet and decant your urine, your hot urine, down the pan, you'll see it sink straight to the bottom of the toilet. Now you'd think because it's warmer it would float on the surface, but it contains a great deal of minerals and salts, so it's heavier and it sinks.
And have you had any people with end-stage kidney failure get their kidney function back and come off dialysis or anything like that?
Not been tested for dialysis, although I have tried with a friend. In fact, I have a bit of a problem with my own kidneys. I have a polycystic kidney.
Polycystic generally has a relationship with low iodine. Do you have a supplement with iodine?
I'm taking Legal's iodine.
How many drops are you taking?
2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, and the stuff I've made myself. It's it's a proper 10%. It's not the 10% that people are trading.
You think people are trading 10% Lugol's that isn't?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's interesting. They've just got the formula wrong, or deliberate? Do you think?
No, I think it's got the formula wrong. I found a recipe from a guy called Israel on the net, and of course I had to have a quick play around with the maths to see if he'd done it right. And it made a great deal of sense what he was saying. So I made my own. Yeah.
Right,
at least I know what's in it.
Yes, quite. I think iodine is one of the most important elements out there, and particularly Lugol's with the potassium iodide added to the elemental iodine. With all the Fukushima radiation coming out, absolutely essential that we have enough iodine to stop the radiation getting into the iodine receptors.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, people don't seem to understand that radiation is not nearly as worrying as it could be if you have full nutrition. People don't realise that we have the receptors, but if the receptors are full, for instance, the radioactive iodine just will float on past.
Yeah, it's a bit like the natural progesterone. A first-hand experience of this, and I've seen uterine fibroids shrivel up and virtually vanish. And it's the same principle because the receptors from the progesterone are the same receptors that the estrogen uses to make the benign tumours grow. So the logic made sense to me. So we gave it a whirl, and it works.
Well, people are being barraged by estrogens at the moment. Mainly, I think, in bread products. I don't know if you've looked at the label of a packaged bread in the supermarket, but every single packet of bread is only partly wheat. Most of them are about 40 to 45% soya.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's. I went into the supermarket to do some filming. They chucked me out, but I looked at every loaf of bread. The whole lot have been cut with soya. So because Hovis used to, for instance, say a whole wheat, but it doesn't anymore. It says whole meal.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that.
And then because soya is so cheap, they're feeding it to the chickens. So the chickens and the eggs are absolutely laced with omega-6. So a chicken that's been fed soya will have about 20 times more omega-6 than would be safe, that would be normal. So when they use that phrase, eggs is eggs, these days eggs aren't eggs. They're quite dangerous. And similarly, we used to see cows in fields, but you don't see those so often now because they've put them in factories.
Yes.
Poor cows being fed soya, never seeing the sun, never knowing what grass looks like, and we're being fed this rubbish. And as a result, people are being hugely poisoned with soya, and the people eating soya products, burgers and so on, and drinking soya milk, they're in real trouble.
Mm.
Worse still, by the way, are the babies who are being fed on soya formula. I think it was about 28 years ago or something that formula first came on the market for babies who were allergic to cow's milk. And now those children are 25, 26 years old, at the oldest, and they all have one big problem, men and women, which is great difficulty in reproducing because their whole hormonal cycle has been damaged by the estrogen and then further damaged by all the chlorine and bromine and possibly fluoride that they're getting as well.
Mm.
Most people's hormones are being made of the wrong materials these days, which explains the thyroid epidemic, which is, as you know, rampant out there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the sad thing is that in the old days, before levothyroxine, doctors used to give dried, desiccated animal thyroid, maybe 1 grain or 2 grains of it. It's a very small amount. And that had all the balance of T4, T3, T2, and so on. But now with levothyroxine, it's just got T4. And although it helps people's symptoms, it means they're on it for life.
Mm.
And they're going to have a shorter life and have a lot of problems. I try to encourage people to research themselves about if they have a thyroid problem and to consider the natural alternatives. Unfortunately, the GP isn't allowed legally to prescribe natural thyroid like their predecessors were. They have no choice but to give a drug. And it's very, very sad, really. People would
Yes.
be a lot healthier. But the biggest problem is the lack of iodine. I don't really know, but over in Japan, whereas in England, 90% of menopausal women report hot flushes and the usual menopausal symptoms, whereas in Japan, only 10% of women experience those menopausal symptoms and hot flushes. And Japanese women only get about 1/10 of the cancer rate of English women, for example. And it's been tied down now to the fact they're eating so much seaweed and so much fish that they're getting the equivalent of two drops of Lugol's a day.
Mm.
Um, so, have you noticed any differences after taking the iodine? Clearer thinking, maybe?
The sloping bed is what you're saying about the Lugol's, but no, I haven't noticed any difference with clearer thinking. But um, I'm pretty sure my granddaughter's absolutely incredible. She's been on a sloping bed from conception right through to 5 years of age. And she's incredible. She's absolutely incredible, and she has been for many years. And my new granddaughter, um, she's on a sloping bed again, and I insist on this actually because I'm pretty damn sure that putting a baby on a flat bed will cause sudden infant death syndrome. And yeah, I'm absolutely certain that it's doing something for our mental capacity. For example, a recent report, a report that come through today, was it yesterday? Not sure. A lady who was, she wrote that I thought my life was over. She said I was suiciding on ice cream. And I tilted the bed, 2009 it was, and she said it took me a long time to tilt the bed, and I got around to doing it. And she said it was just like a light bulb had switched on. She lost £100 in weight.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And is that common to lose weight?
What we found in the early days, which was really interesting, was it was myself and a good friend of mine, Billy. We both tilted the beds, and I talked him into tilting the beds, and we both this is in the early days. We both noticed that our weight went up.
Went up.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, our clothes became loose.
To gaining muscle in that case.
Well, and bone density. So your bone
Oh,
density goes up and your muscle density goes up, but we were definitely burning fat.
How interesting.
Hmm.
And with brain function, are you noticing that people with dementia or Alzheimer's are getting improvements?
Well, with short-term memory loss, one of the ladies, well, it was a lady that recovered her eyesight in Teignmouth with multiple sclerosis. She said, I don't know whether this is anything to do with the sloping bed. She said, but I'd walk to the door and to do something, and by the time I got to the door, I'd forgotten what it was, and I'd spend as long as I liked, and I would not be able to remember what it was I went to the door for. She said, now, and this was only after a month or so, I walked to the door, she said, and I'll forget, just the same as anyone else forgets. She says, and I pause, and then I can remember what it is I wanted to do. She says, so the short-term memory function had improved. And I think that demands a study in itself.
Well, absolutely. Funnily enough, when I'm trying to assess whether people are low on iodine or not, I ask them, do you remember where you put your car keys? Do you remember why you walked into a room? And obviously, as you know, that's a pretty common thing. I found that most people, after 2 or 3 months on iodine, they now remember where their car keys are and remember why they walked in the room. So maybe the two combined,
Yes.
that's super memory, people. So what about dementia and Alzheimer's? Anything there?
Not getting any reports from them. It's not something I've focused on. Again, what I'm trying to do is focus on things that you will actually get reports back from. If I help someone with dementia or someone with a memory problem, what's the chances of them reporting back to me? Because this is a huge problem with people working outside of the medical profession, because people don't adhere to the protocols that we set out. In fact, the medical profession have the same problem.
And what about the length of time that you sleep? Do you find that you get a more restful night and don't need to sleep so long, or any changes like that, or is it just the same?
Yes. Well, I do tend to wake up in the night and get up and have a walk around and then get back into bed. But I'm doing that purposefully, because I've realised the importance of being active and moving around rather than the sedentary lifestyle. It's very important. But just one thing on the intelligence side, which I think you'll find interesting. Um, the circulation changed when we stood up. Right? I don't know. Are you religious or?
No.
Oh, okay. So when we were walking around on all fours, the circulation, the foraminae were in the back of the head, and these are the holes in the skull that carry the vessels to and from the scalp through to the brain. And when we stood up, according to Dean Falk, she's a scientist over in America who has a theory called the radiator theory, which I disagree with. But when we stood up, Dean Falk measured where took notice of where the foraminae were on the skulls that had changed, like on Homo erectus, and those foraminae had migrated to the top of the skull. So the circulation through the brain had completely changed when we stood up. Now, another great scientist, Professor Michel Cabernac, he did some experiments with a guy on an exercise cycle. And he placed a Doppler probe where the eye meets the nose, and he got the guy to work out, and it showed normal blood flow from the brain out to the skin. But when the guy becomes overheated on the cycle, the blood flow actually changes direction. It's now flowing from the skin back through the brain, and there are no valves in those vessels. So something has changed the circulation. Now, Falk says the brain decides where it wants to send the circulation. I'm saying because of the evaporative heat loss caused by the exercise, they change the density of the fluids in the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid, and it was actually changed sufficient enough for it to flow back against the pressure of the heart.
Right.
So circulation improves brain function. So if we have the bed on an angle, we're again improving circulation. Now,
Yeah.
we haven't. See, what I'm trying to convey to anyone that's willing to listen is we have an assumption that beds should be flat. Now, if we go back to history, there's a brilliant drawing of a hospital in Constantinople from the 13th century, and it shows rows of inclined beds. And it's perfectly obvious that the artist hasn't got mistaken. They are inclined because the nurse standing next to the bed, you can actually see that it's up level with almost level with the shoulders at the head end, and yet at the foot end, and you can see definitely that the legs are shorter. So Constantinople at that time were renowned for being very successful medical people, which is really interesting. But if we go back further still, the ancient Egyptians, 5,000 years ago, when we pulled out the beds from the Egyptian tombs, they were all raised at the head end. They're all higher than the foot end. Even Tutankhamun's camping bed, he had a fold-up camping bed, and that was built on an incline. No one bothered to question why these beds were inclined. I guess they all had diamonds and gold and jewels in the hands and very little in the brains.
Right. And talk to me a little bit more about eyesight and how common might it be to be able to repair a macula?
Well, we have a friend over in Brixham, and he has diabetes, and he had bleeding from the back of the eyes, and he was told he needed surgery. The guy's 82, and he was told that he needed laser surgery, and that he might not be successful, and that his eyes were worsening. And his eyes healed up the cells, and during a holiday, because he went away for a holiday, and then slept flat, the eyes started to bleed again from the back of the eyes. And since he's been back on an inclined bed, stopped bleeding again. But interestingly enough, while he's been on the sloping bed, his sugar levels have been dropping as well. And this was confirmed it's the first study, and I'm really, really grateful to a guy called Tateki Yeting. And he's from an island called Pohnpei in Micronesia, which is just sort of northeast of Australia. And they have a tremendous problem with obesity in this place due to the introduction of the American diet and possibly the soy that you mentioned. And it's a pandemic on the island, but he got 11 patients to tilt the beds. Right across the board, the sugar levels dropped. Now, just by tilting the bed, they didn't make any dietary changes. But two of them, he noticed that the sugar levels had gone up at one point, and he investigated why they should go in the opposite direction. And they both admitted that they hadn't been on the sloping bed, and one had been to binging out at a wedding for 2 days, and the other one had been binging out at a funeral for 2 days. And apparently when they went back to the inclined bed, their sugar levels come down as well.
So increasing the functionality of the pancreas?
Yes.
And have you heard of anybody getting completely over their diabetes?
Well, this guy in Brixham, his insulin, he takes insulin, and he's noticed that both of them have noticed that the insulin levels have dropped dramatically. I think he was on 32, 20, was it 26 twice a day of the slow, and then a dose of the fast. And he skipped the fast and skipped the one dose of the slow, and I think he's on about 15 or 16 now units. So that's a massive improvement from just tilting the bed. But of course, diet plays a role, as we know, with diabetes.
Well, very much so. I'm type 1 diabetic myself, and it's...
Have you noticed any change?
Well, when I was... well, no, not really. No, I don't think so. Um, uh, just to clarify for people, I understand that the 6 inch measurement really is to be adhered to. 5 inches or 7 inches doesn't work as well. Would that be right?
No, no. It all depends on the length of the bed. If you've got a king size bed, you probably have to raise your bed 7 inches or 7.5 inches.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because whatever the length of the bed is. I mean, if you've got a cot to prevent sudden infant death syndrome, then you'd probably need to raise that cot about 3 or 4 inches at the head end.
Right.
So it all depends on the length of the bed, really. I have a friend who she sleeps on what could be described as the north face of the Eiger. But I go in and I just shake my head when I see a bed. Um, but she's 72 years young, and back in was it? Hang on, 1995, she was ready for a wheelchair. She had a condition called psoriatic arthritis, which eats into her fingernails and toenails, and psoriasis all over her body and in her hair. And she's racked with pain. She'd get up every morning and she'd immerse her hands in hot water just to get her hands working. And it would take about an hour and a half to get her hands working. And then she'd bite the bullet and do what she could. And then she heard me talking to this guy who was staying with her at the time, this guy with a spinal cord injury. And this lady's a nurse. So she stood and listened, and she said, "Oh, have you got coming down here now? Somebody's talking another load of old bull." Yeah, but she sat there and she listened, and you could see the penny had dropped. And she tilted her own bed. She didn't say anything to anybody, but she got up the next morning. No paralysis in her hands.
Wow.
And it hasn't come back. And she's got virtually no psoriasis on her body now. Occasionally, she'll get a little rosette on the base of the spine, and that's it.
Wow, that's amazing. And why do you think that the psoriasis went away? What do you think the mechanism going on there
Well,
is?
psoriasis skin contains a great deal more sodium and potassium than normal healthy skin. So, the sloping bed could have actually helped those minerals to migrate away from the skin surface. Like you put the Lagels on the skin and it vanishes.
Yeah.
The same could be happening with the mineral salts that are probably causing the skin to desiccate.
Well, very interesting. Just while I think about it, getting back to you and the Lugol's iodine, how long have you been doing 4 drops? Obviously, 4 drops is quite a lot.
5 days?
All right, well, that's fine. Are you taking selenium as well?
Not at the moment, but I'm tempted to. Well, do I need Brazil nuts? Because I'm a bit worried about Brazil nuts being irradiated.
Yes. Who knows what they're doing radiation-wise? I don't know. Yeah, there are a number of ways to get selenium in supplement form.
Yes.
There are ones made from yeast, which is a type that I sell on my website.
Yes.
Because when you take iodine, it depletes your selenium level. It is a really good idea to take selenium at the same time. Something like 200 micrograms.
You do get selenium from meat though, and eggs and.
Well, yes, indeed. But even so, really, I try to recommend to everybody who's supplementing with anything that if they can afford it, to take a whole set of 90 odd nutrients at once, because so many people are low on just one mineral, and many people are low on selenium because selenium just isn't in the soil the way it used to be.
Yeah.
And there'd be a huge reduction in prostate issues if people had a good mineral balance, particularly selenium and zinc, for example. So tell me more of the results that you're getting. I mean, it really is amazing, isn't it? Just such a simple thing can have such a dramatic effect. It's incredible. Hard to think of anything else that doesn't cost any money. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? It's free.
That's the problem, yeah. Because it's free, people think it's worthless, but what a mistake that is.
Well, clearly. So tell me about some of the other wonderful things you've
Well,
seen.
this guy that I mentioned with Parkinson's. Now, Parkinson's is really interesting because in the early stages, the person affected by Parkinson's can wake up paralysed in the morning, so get morning paralysis. What happens is the partner usually drags them off the bed and sits them up a little bit, and they come round a little bit more. And then they swing the legs out over the bed and get them sitting up, and they come round a bit more. And they get them to stand, and they come round a little bit more. And they get them to shuffle around, and the gait improves, and they start walking around. And by the end of the day, they're walking around like you and I. And then they go back to that flat bed and screw it all up again.
How interesting.
Yes. Nighttime paralysis. That's been reduced. You know, when people get they wake up, the body's in like a catatonic state, and I mean, my wife suffers with it, but fortunately, since the bed's been on an angle, she very rarely gets a problem with this. Now, it was happening sometimes 4, 5, 6 times in a night, and you know, she could be getting it every day, and you know, it's made such a huge difference just preventing that. What else? Oh, I really don't know where to start.
Let me just ask you on MS and Parkinson's. Have you seen anybody get anywhere close to completely reversing it?
Well, I'm glad you brought me back to that, because I tend to drift off because it's quite a complicated subject. But back to the guy with Parkinson's, we tilted his bed, yeah, and apart from all the fluid that the guy had lost, I get a phone call saying that I turned over in bed, and I looked at my husband's face, and that Parkinson's mask, which she'd grown to recognise every night she went to bed, wasn't there. His face was relaxed, and it looked like her own husband back. So she shook him. She said she'd had the first conversation with her husband in years. It was incredible. And then a few more weeks went past, and his walking was improving all the time. I was getting reports back all of the time saying that they couldn't believe the changes. His attention span when I met the guy was about 1 minute at best, and then he'd go into sleep. Then he'd come back out of his sleep, and you'd have a little talk and try and get something through to him, and then he'd be gone again. And it was heartbreaking to see the couple struggling. And a few more weeks went past, and I went round there and knocked on the door because I was hearing all of these incredible stories. And when I opened the door, who should meet me was this guy called Brian. And it was the same guy that was like a giant water balloon when I met him, with an attention span of a minute, to a normal looking guy who could walk normally with a normal gait. And he said, well, he thanked me on the step, and I mean, that turned my legs to jelly. And he said, you want to talk to Audrey? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, hang on a minute, I'll go and get her. And I thought, what? And he walked up, I watched the guy walk up the stairs, shouted his message, turned around and walked back down. And we went in and we had an amazing conversation. And then a couple of weeks later, I get another call saying that she's concerned, and this happened very, very quickly. I know it sounds ridiculous. It happened very, very quickly. He'd been off taking himself down the school playing fields to see his granddaughters playing at school in the sports, and he'd bring himself back, so no problem at all. And another week or two went past, and she said I'd seen him go out and look at the car and lift the bonnet, and you know, and she didn't think anything of it because he wasn't taxed or MOT'd, or I shouldn't really say this if we get the people in trouble. And he drove off in the car and drove it off, and then come back.
Wow, that's amazing. You must be feeling pretty good about yourself, I think.
Well, the icing on the cake, and I'll tell you it exactly as it happened. I got a phone call, and somebody asked me about the bull terrier. What would a male bull terrier be like around a severely disabled child? I said, what's the matter with your kid? She said, why do you want to know? I said, I might be able to help. She said, don't be bloody ridiculous. She said, I rang for information about a puppy, see what a bull terrier would be like around a severely disabled child. I said, look, I can't make you listen. She said, spit it out then. And I told her. And she said, I've been halfway around the world. Nothing can be done for my daughter. I said, look, I can't make you listen. Anyway, she starts crying because the penny drops because I've explained everything in great detail. And she starts crying, and her husband comes on the phone, and he gives me a right rollicking down the phone saying, you've upset my missus. What have you said to my missus? And she said, no, listen to what he has to say, so I have to explain it all over again. But anyway, to cut a long story short, they tilted the girl's bed. Now, she's 12 years of age, and she hasn't walked at the age of 12. She wears calipers daytimes and night times to keep the legs straight. Different set of calipers for on the night time. Anybody that has a child with cerebral palsy will know what I'm talking about. She had severe scoliosis of the spine, and the prognosis in '95 was if she ever developed the ability to comb or brush her own hair, let us know, but don't hold your breath because it'll never happen. That's what the parents were told, and they'd gone halfway around the world looking for help for this girl. And I started to get some reports back. And yeah, she's doing really well. Things are changing, but we're not really sure what's changing. And a few more weeks ago past, and then I get another report. And then occasionally I'd ring up and ask how she's doing. And she said, oh, she seems to be stronger. But we could be imagining this, it could, because the girl's very clever, very articulate. And then a few more weeks go past, and she's definitely getting stronger, and she's turned over in bed, and she couldn't do that before, and then she's turning over all the time, and then she's managing to pull herself up the bed, and it was incredible. As this was unfolding, it was absolutely incredible. And a few more weeks go past, and she's making so much progress, but the muscles in the legs are looking too masculine. Now, this is a girl that hadn't got muscles in her legs because she'd never walked. Well, the muscles were there, but they hadn't been exercised. And they said that the muscles were looking far too masculine, so we've put the bed back down. Immediately they put the bed back down, she started to revert back. So they put the bed back up, and then it went on for quite a few months. And the icing on the cake came at 8 months, and I got a frantic call from the wife, the mum, and she said, we're off to the school. I said, well, whatever's happened? She said, we've just had a call saying that the girl had got out of the wheelchair at school, walked at school, and managed to walk up some steps. 12 years of age. Now, it gets even better because some time had passed, and there were more improvements. She clothed herself, dressed herself, and I believe it's functioned like any healthy person now. I got a call straight out of the blue and picked up the phone, and I heard this child say, hello, is that Andrew? I said, yes. She said, I'm the little girl that you've been helping with cerebral palsy. I'm just ringing to say thank you for all you've done for me. My legs went to jelly and I collapsed on the floor. I could not stand up.
Amazing. And so, cerebral palsy doesn't get much worse than that, does it?
Irreversible brain damage, but I like these irreversible conditions because apparently they seem to be reversible.
Well, I found that out myself 28 years ago, that I had arthritis so badly that I couldn't move, couldn't put my shoes and socks on, and they said it was irreversible, and they were completely wrong.
Yes.
I was low on minerals and vitamins. I reversed the whole thing, never had a problem since. And just shortly after that, my dad's best friend got cancer, and he was told he had 6 weeks to live. And he managed to phone up Linus Pauling, who he found in the phone book. He said, what do I do? And Linus Pauling said, well, build up slowly, but as fast as you can, to 25 grams of vitamin C a day. And he lived another 25 years.
Wow.
When he did die, it wasn't of cancer. So I saw firsthand.
We
things.
just heard an interesting story on a lady that tried the cannabis oil for
Oh, yeah.
a brain tumour, and the brain tumour's vanished.
Well, it's one of the most successful remedies out there.
You know, how can you can't verify that yourself because I haven't been privy to the MRI scans or anything, but you know, I have no reason to doubt what I was told. This is my dog drinking in the background. Sorry for that.
One of the things that people don't understand is that you don't need an MRI scan or an X-ray or anything like that to tell whether your cancer is getting better or getting worse. There are several blood tests that can be done very cheaply, harmlessly, which are probably a lot more accurate because people don't realize that some of these scans, particularly a CAT scan, which can be 500, 600 times more powerful than a chest X-ray, for example, people don't realize the damage they're doing by the testing when
Yes,
there are perfectly good, very inexpensive, natural ways to do it.
yes,
People don't. Also, another thing that people don't realize is that you can have a chemotherapy test so that what happens is somebody gets cancer and they just put them on chemotherapy, but they could, for a little bit more money, test the cells of their body against all these different agents, chemotherapy agents. So same with fillings of teeth. A dentist who knows what he's doing can test the filling material to see whether it's compatible with you. So there are loads of people who are having very bad reactions from chemo, for example, that if they'd done a simple test, they could have avoided that.
mm.
Personally, I think it's absolutely criminal what's going on in the medical profession.
I agree. I agree.
And it's not that most doctors are anything other than lovely people, but the method of teaching them a drugs only way of testing and a radiation only way and a surgery only way. You go to a doctor, you've got these three choices, and it's just ridiculous. I realized some time ago that people go to the doctor believing that a doctor is a health expert. And after all, it's called the National Health Service, but they don't study health. Health isn't on the curriculum. They study disease, they study drugs, but at no point do doctors look at healthy people to examine why they're healthy. It's just incredible.
It's a sickness industry. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So do you think, I'm asking a silly question in a way, do you think there's any chance that doctors in general, the NHS in general, would ever accept inclined bed therapy?
It's practice for respiratory problems, but again, they tend to elevate the upper half of the bed and not tilt the whole bed. And again, this guy with diabetes was in a hospital ward because he'd fell and broken his femur. And I was invited over there to tilt the bed and to talk to the doctors and nurses. I talked to the doctors and nurses, but I could not tilt that bed. It just hadn't got the capability of being tilted correctly. And they said it was one of the most modern beds there is. So, there are beds out there that will do it. And one of the interesting things that they use the full tilting bed for is when someone comes out of surgery under anaesthetic, is they tilt them head down and feet up. And I have actually been in the recovery room while my son was coming out of anaesthetic, and I asked them why he was head down and feet up, and they said, well, it's in case he's sick, so that the vomit will clear the airways. I said, well, have you thought that you might be making him sick by turning him upside down? And the look of bewilderment on her face. And I said, I'll tell you what, you tilt his bed, his oxygen sats will go up, his heart rate will decrease by 10 to 12 beats per minute, his respiration rate will decrease by 4 to 5 breaths per minute, and within a few minutes, or possibly less, he'll come out of his induced anaesthesia. She said, well, it'll take 20 minutes for him to come out. As soon as I tilted his bed, the monitors went exactly as I predicted they would go. And he put his thumb up and he said, I'm okay, Dad. And got up and he wasn't sick.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And she said that the nurse The nurse come back to the ward where my son was being kept, and my wife was at the ward, and she kept saying, "It's incredible what I've just witnessed." She said, "This alone could save the NHS a fortune in recovery times. You know, we've got to do something about this, but nothing ever happens. You know, you get lots and lots of promises from lots of people, and nothing ever happens, except that study in Pompeii. I mean, that was incredible. Um, but yeah, it's been a long old struggle. And of course, the theory all started from picking up. I have no idea you can see this GCSE biology book.
All right.
I'll hold it up so that everybody can see. By D.G. McCain. And I wanted to understand what trees were doing with salts. That was the question I had. Now, I have an engineering background. So I got this from the car boot sale. It cost me 20 pence because I'm a cheapskate. I wouldn't buy a new version. And I started to look through it and I just shook my head. I couldn't believe what I was reading. For example, transporting plants, chapter 7, page 71. Water evaporates from the leaves and causes a kind of suction, which pulls water up the stem. Now, hang on, let's have a think about this for a second. You have a leaf that's full of pores, which are holes, and you're telling me that those leaves can drag water 300 feet to the top of a giant Californian redwood. I couldn't stop falling about laughing. It was absolutely ridiculous that was being taught in school, and I do remember it from school. And then, because of D.G. McKean, he puts in his comments, and he'll add a little add-on saying that there's insufficient evidence or it's poorly understood. And time again, you got many biologists regard transpiration as an inevitable consequence of photosynthesis. In order to photosynthesize, a leaf has to take in carbon dioxide from the air, and the pathway which allows carbon dioxide in will also let water vapor out. Now, if you've got a leaf with holes that's causing this magical suction, now surely it's going to suck air in because that's going to be the path of least resistance. So if you're generating a magical suction, you're going to be drawing air in. But of course that doesn't happen. And well, the other thing I read was, you may have learned in physics that you cannot draw water up by suction to a height of more than about 10 metres. But many trees are taller than this. So I thought, well, hey, there's a contradiction in itself. And there was just loads and loads. And they're still marked. These were the original marks that I put in the book all those years ago when I was falling about the floor, laughing. So I said, okay then, how does it really work? It took me 20 minutes to solve it. I thought I'll ignore all the stuff that doesn't make sense, which is about 99.9% of the book, and start with what I know as a fact. And I knew that 98% of all the water evaporates through the leaves. So the water that's drawn in through the root evaporates through the leaves. And evaporated water must change the density of whatever it's evaporated from, and that's the sap. Now the sap contains sugars which are produced by converting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and sugars, as we know, are denser than water. So when we evaporate water from the leaf, we change the density of the sap. That is so bloody obvious, and yet no one has thought about it. So hang on, if you make the sap denser at the top of the tree than at the bottom of the tree, gravity dictates that the denser sap will migrate towards a sink. Now that sink could be a fruit, could be a branch, could be the trunk, could be the roots, predominantly the roots. So we've triggered a downward flow towards the roots. Now the tree takes up most of these salts and sugars in its continual cycle of growth. So there's the sump or the store. So any concentrated sap that reaches the roots will be diluted by incoming water from the soil, which is a dilute solution of nutrients. So that sap then is dragged back up the other side of the tree. So you've got a downward flow generated by evaporation and gravity in the phloem, which generates molecular drag, and that molecular drag is attached to every molecule in the tree. So it stretches right back down the xylem, right the way down through the roots and out into the soil water. So by triggering that downward flow, we're actually pulling water in from the soil into the tree. It's almost like, if you can imagine the sap behaving like a piece of string, and every now and again we clip a weight on the one side, and that causes the whole thing to rotate. So the tree never needed to lift water from the roots to its leaves. That was the mistake they asked. They asked the wrong question. The wrong question was, how do trees raise water from the roots to the leaves? The question they should have asked was, how do trees circulate sap? And then the answer would have been so blatantly obvious. And yet, we're still teaching this in school. I even set up an experiment at the local secondary school down here in Paynton, and the head of science, Mr. Smith, saw the tubular model, which I had strung out of his classroom windows, his upper classroom windows, which was a giant U-shaped tube with both open ends into 2 bottles of water, and the whole loop of tube was filled with water, and a tiny amount of coloured salt solution, only 5 mils of coloured solution, was added to the centre of the tube, which was then raised up to the upper classroom. The salt's percolated down one side, one bottle starts to overflow, and the other bottle goes down. And it's not siphon effect, because if you trigger a siphon effect, it's much quicker. This is a flow and return driven by evaporation and gravity. The school kids were there and they all listened and they all saw the experiment and they were all very excited. And he puts his hand up and he says, I have no problem with this. This is exactly how trees raise water to the leaves. But what can I do? I have to keep teaching the national curriculum.
It's crazy. It's the national fool system, not the national school system.
Yes. Well, I even took it to Exeter University. I took it to, it's been there a couple of times, to Professor Edzard Ernst. Have you heard of Ernst?
No.
He's the guy in charge of alternative therapies. I suspect he's there to make sure that these alternative therapies never get off the ground. And I was invited in there to give a talk about the discovery. And that there was a team there, doctors and Ernst, and they saw the experiment, heard the explanation, thoroughly agreed with it, sent me a letter saying they were very excited by what they'd seen. We need to get a study done. What best would the study be done in? And I said, well, varicose veins and leg ulcers, because they've shown remarkable recoveries. And he said, well, we need to see this doctor. And I won't mention the doctor's name, although I should mention the doctor's name. So I had an invitation to go and see this doctor. And as I walked through the door, he said, are you Mr. Fletcher? I said, yes. He said, before you say a word, I don't want anything to do with you, your theory, your explanations, or any possible study. Do I make myself clear? I said, oh, yeah, perfectly. And then I came away. So he had quickly realised that him being a vascular guy, depending on repeat vascular surgeries to make his lucrative living, and the last thing he wants to hear is that a couple of blocks of wood under someone's bed could actually prevent someone having vascular surgery.
It's close to murder, taking that viewpoint for a doctor, isn't it? Knowing that there is a cure and not taking it up. I mean, that's murder, isn't it?
It's disgraceful. I wouldn't say it was murder, but it's definitely disgraceful.
Well, it is if their patients die.
He's lucky I'm mature, because when I was a youngster, I would have levelled the guy, but, there you go. You grow up as you get older, don't you?
Well, yeah, supposedly. That's what they say. So talk to me a bit more about the leg ulcer thing. Again, do you have a good explanation as to why that's happening?
Yeah, again, it's tissue breakdown because of circulation. It's always circulation. Circulation is so important, because without circulation, we're dust and bones. So Anything that compromises the circulation can be a varicose ulcer, or it can be a pressure ulcer. What you've done is you've actually impinged the circulation by an external pressure, be that a vein or actually coming in contact with a bed or a chair for a prolonged period of time. So if you can restore that circulation, and the sloping bed excels in that, because when you lie on the sloping bed, and you'll know this, your weight's distributed differently. You no longer feel like a sack of spuds lying on the ground. You actually feel the bed feels somehow softer, and then you've applied traction to the spine, but you've also applied some shear forces to the tissue, which people voiced concerns about. But you've also increased the circulation. Now, if you can increase the circulation, you can speed up the healing. And my father had varicose ulcers for 20, 25 years, and he was a window cleaner, hard man. You would never meet a harder man. When he died of cancer, he never took so much as a paracetamol, sorry. And he had these three leg ulcers, and they healed up while he was on the sloping bed. Just healed up, skinned over. I'd never done that in 25 years, despite he'd had all the bandages, he'd had the seaweed bandages slapped on his legs, and he'd had regular dressings, and he'd dressed his legs himself all these years, and they healed up.
That's amazing. 25 years of a leg off is incredible. So if it's improving circulation, presumably you're getting results with erectile dysfunction, are you?
Yes, we've had reports of erectile dysfunction, even in type 2 diabetes.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And early morning wood, I think it's called. Get a lot of reports on that. Yeah.
I've interviewed a chap called Tony Pantalaresco once or twice, and he has a testosterone boosting formula. And I thought, well, I'll give that a try, see if I notice any differences. And I went to the International Anti-Aging Conference 2 weeks ago, and they had all the very latest bits of measuring equipment and so on. I went on several of the devices to get my levels measured. And this guy said, I can't believe it. You've got the testosterone of a 30-year-old.
Nice.
I was really chuffed. But if anybody is interested in boosting their testosterone levels apart from inclining the bed, check out Tony Pantalaresco, an erectile dysfunction video on YouTube. He's amazing. Have you come across Tony?
Yes, I have. Yes, I've listened to some of his videos. Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. My fridge is full of his concoctions.
Yeah. Yeah, he's quite an amazing guy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've run through quite a number of complaints. What other things have you noticed?
Well, one of the first things we noticed, and again, this is how it happens. It's just nothing's planned. You've gone down this you shine the light down, and you just follow the light beam. And I met a lady, and she was a palmist, yeah. And she pointed out about the half moons on your fingers, how important they were for circulation. She said, we always look at the half moons when we're reading someone's hands, and we can tell a great deal. I forget the formula, but she said, if they're too big, there's a problem with the heart, and if they're too small, there's a problem with the circulation. And she said she can tell a great deal. And she said that the strange thing is, since I've had my bed tilted, the half moons have come back.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's rare that you see anybody, apart from half moons on their thumbs, that have half moons at all.
Yeah, I've got full set of half moons, yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah,
very good.
And the other guy, John, the guy's name, with the spinal cord injury, apparently Afro-Caribbeans seldom have half moons. And he was an African American, and he got half moons on his fingers as well, which was quite incredible. And hair as well, that was another thing I started to notice. And again, it was rather an embarrassing moment, but a nurse friend of mine, lady, she said, I've got a complaint about this bed. And I said, tell me more. She said, well, I'm having to shear my pubic hairs. She said, because they don't stop growing. They're no longer short and curlies. And I thought that was fascinating because if you can maintain the circulation to the hair, then there's no reason why it should drop out. So I started to monitor my own hair on my head, and I noticed that the colour had changed and it started to go darker. You can't see a great deal here, but and I noticed that I stopped getting hair on my pillars. Now, this was also backed up by Roger Kirk, who I mentioned earlier with multiple sclerosis, because Roger had said, quite off the cuff, how come my hairbrush has not got hair in it anymore? He says, I used to have to spend ages picking all the hair out of the brush, and I don't find hair in the shower anymore. So I did an experiment, and I have my hair cut, as you can see. It's one style every time. And my wife, she cuts my hair. So we were having it cut at 2 monthly intervals, and I was saving all the hair in these little tins. And I saved them up for the whole year. And I looked across the hair follicles and the hair, and there was a definite change in the hair texture, and there was a definite change in the hair colour. It was getting darker. And also, there was more hair. So my hair was growing more, which is, well, you're led to believe that's never going to happen. So anyway, it was fascinating, and I really don't think. I mean, I've still got more hair than my younger brother.
Well, brilliant. Do you know, a very funny thing, about 20 years ago, I met this guy who insisted that I touched his head, and he had this like baby hair all over his head, and he said that he had been bald for several years, but he'd had a back injury, and he decided to help his back injury, he'd get an inversion table where you strap your feet in and you hang upside down.
Yes.
And he's been hanging upside down for 5 minutes twice a day. And after a few months, he noticed his hair regrowing. It seemed that the blood flowing upside down had stimulated follicle growth.
Well, you're still using gravity, even if you're upside down. But the problem with being upside down, and again, my wife and I tested it. Well, I don't know whether. Yeah, okay, I'll give you the full story. I wanted to understand if there were any changes to the density of urine because we tilted the bed. So we measured our urine density using a hydrometer, and we measured the urine density while we were on an angle bed, head up, feet down, and then we measured the urine density on a flat bed, and normal daily activity urine density, and head down density. So we were lying head down with the feet up. And what we found is that the flat bed actually lowered the urine density over and above normal daily activity, and it was quite remarkable how the salts were not being excreted in the urine. And then we measured the incline bed, and we found that the urine density had gone up markedly. So the urine was much stronger and much more dense than either horizontal or normal daily routines. And the icing on the cake again came when we slept head down and feet up. And what we found was that the urine density went down to near water readings. In other words, no toxins were leaving the body while we were head down and feet up. But the side spin on that was we both got diarrhea. And we did it for a few days, and the diarrhea was pretty persistent. So, yes, it would be a great slimming aid to sleep head down and feet up, but NASA have shown, and NASA have spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars paying people. In fact, I think you can get $7,000 just for sleeping head down and feet up without getting out of bed for a few months. And what they found is that they can actually accelerate the aging process by 10 times faster than here on Earth. And that mirrors exactly what happens to astronauts in space, because you've taken gravity out of the equation in space. Well, you're not actually, but you've you've negated its effects by spinning around the Earth fast enough to counteract the pull of the Earth. But you've not actually got away from gravity. But astronauts, again, back to the Ebola virus as well, their immune system in space, it gets knocked about. The bone mineral loss is prolific, 10 times faster than here on Earth. Neurological damage has been experienced. Multiple organ failures from bed rest and from being in space. You know, it doesn't matter which way you hit this from. It just matches up.
Yeah, amazing. And what other health issues has it overcome? Let me give you one. How about lung function, emphysema, or anything like that?
Yes. Okay. And this is a really interesting one. There was a dog with the lungs filling up with fluid. He was a Rottweiler, and he was having the lungs drained two times a week at the vets. And the vet said, "I can't do this anymore." And he'd literally taken the dog home to die. And a person that had been listening to my theory and my explanations and had been sleeping on a sloping bed told him, he says, "Look, just shove the dog in a room and put the dehumidifier on." Because I'd explained how my friend's fish tank was being emptied of fluid, and his dehumidifier was filling up with fluid because it dried the air out, so the water molecules were leaving the fish tank into the air and then into the dehumidifier, and he was forever topping up the fish tank. So we put the dog in the room and left the dehumidifier running, and it cleared up the fluid on the lungs. That was without the sloping bed. But of course, respiratory problems is one of the things, along with hiatus hernia and GERD, is that the medical profession will actually recommend raising the bed on blocks. So they know it does work. But the worst thing is, and I've seen this with my own eyes, is that the nurses and the doctors know full well how harmful this sloping bed, how harmful the flat bed is. And I'll just see if I can find you this is Deconditioning the Consequence of Bed Rest by Colleen S. Campbell, MSN, ARNP, BC, CRRNA, Geriatric Evaluation and Management. And the objectives of this document is to discuss deconditioning as a clinical entity resulting in a reduced functional capacity of multiple body systems. Just watch that over a minute. Discussing the pathophysiology of prolonged bed rest. List the key interventions that prevent and treat the consequences of bed rest. Inactivity and prolonged bed rest are an unnatural states of the human body. And now this is a very, very moving piece by Dr. Richard Asher, written in 1942. Look at the patient lying alone in bed. What a pathetic picture he makes. The blood clotting in his veins, the lime draining from his bones, the scabula stacking up in his colon, the flesh rotting from his seat, the urine linking from his distended bladder, and the spirit evaporating from his soul. Teach us to live that we may dread unnecessary time in bed. Get people up and we may save patients from an early grave. That's so they know. But back to what I was going to talk about was when someone's terminally ill in hospital, there's a practice that's unwritten, and it's the removal of pillows from terminally ill patients. And this actually speeds up their death. And this is practiced in many hospitals around the UK and in other countries. In fact, it's actually mentioned in the Jewish Code of Ethics. It is forbidden to remove the pillows from a patient who is terminally ill to speed up their demise. So they know that the bed is not the right way to go, and yet hospitals count the success in the number of beds.
Wow, amazing. So, um, with the hiatus hernia, they already know that raised beds work. Would
Yeah.
you say that you can cure a hiatus hernia with the inclined bed alone, or do you think you need to do a lot more?
Um, I've not had any. I've not had any feedback from anyone that said that but I haven't been looking at hiatus hernia. I've been trying to concentrate on conditions that are thought to be irreversible. Probably I shouldn't have done that. Probably I should have gone down the route and re-examined what was happening with hiatus hernia. But certainly, if you get a problem with acid and you tilt the bed, you notice a great deal of improvement in the damage that the acid causes. And again, we know that premature babies in hospitals they're on inclined platforms where they sleep, and yet the parents take them home and put them on flat beds, and that baby's never been flat. I don't have any data to say that I've cured a hiatus hernia, but I've not had anyone come back to me and say that it hasn't cured either.
Right, right. It's amazing what they do to hasten deaths. I mean, the most frightening one is the Liverpool pathway.
What's the Liverpool?
The Liverpool pathway is where they starve the patients to death. They stop giving them food and water, and
Right. Yes. Yes.
and so if anybody hears they've got an elderly relative in the hospital and they hear them say, "Well, we think we're going to put them on the Liverpool pathway," uh, that they're saying we're going to kill your mother, father, whatever it is, very slowly now. It's totally criminal.
Well, I really don't know how they can sleep at night. I really don't.
No, 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 I don't either. So the serious issues, what other serious ones have you seen reversed?
Skin conditions. Quite a few people with psoriasis. There's a friend of mine. Again, we mentioned the one lady with psoriatic arthritis, but there's another lady with psoriasis, and well, she came down to my home and we took a series of photographs, and then we took another series of photographs in a few weeks' time, and then another set of photographs, and the evidence spoke for itself. That the skin was clearing up. Um, I'm trying to think. Trying to think of other conditions. Spine problems aside from spinal cord injury, backache, and people with slip discs. Yeah, it's definitely out there. And again, the traction applied by the bed actually eases the joints apart. And on a previous radio interview where the listeners were invited to try the bed, just put some 6-inch blocks under your bed and see what happens. And then he invited me back in 3 months, and I went back, and we had reports back that people with MS were saying, "Yep, it's helping," and varicose veins. Reports that the veins had decreased, snoring. We mentioned bedwetting earlier. Youngsters wetting the bed. That's and for nurses, if you can solve the problem of people wetting the bed in hospital, it'd take a tremendous amount of pressure off the hospital staff. Sight problems, people with sight problems were reporting that they couldn't actually see clearly out of their new glasses, and we're going back to the old prescription glasses. So there were improvements, and again that happened in the first pilot study with MS. Is that other people, and including one of the guys with spinal cord injury, were reporting that there were improvements in the eyesight. Have we lost you, Clive?
Sorry, I couldn't get the thing to turn on. How about hearing? Anybody getting increases in hearing?
Well, my Um, there's only one case that I know of, and this was interesting because it was only brief, and then it stopped. My step was not really my stepfather, my mother's husband. Um, he had meningitis as a child, which left him deaf, and we tilted the bed, and he began complaining about the loud noises outside of the house, saying that the police cars were frightening him and ambulances when they went past. Now, there's not been an upsurge in those vehicles going past all of a sudden. They've been going past, but he hadn't made the connection that it was open with his ears. But alas, the bed went down again. So you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
You can lead a horse to water and you can't make them think.
Yes. Well, you can lead a human to knowledge, but you can't make them think.
Yeah, quite, exactly. And of course, knowledge is all very good, but without wisdom to use that knowledge wisely, it's pretty useless.
Hmm. Hmm. But what do we do with this now, Clive? You know, we've got this thing here that could actually save our NHS a great deal of money, can save the patients a great deal of suffering, could put a stop to amputations, or gangrene as well. Had some success with gangrene. I met a guy down in Paynton, and he had this huge bandage on his foot. And I asked him what the problem was, and he said he got gangrene. And he went away and tilted his bed, and he got back to me and said that his surgeon was amazed that the flesh that his surgeon had been removing from his foot was actually growing back. Old scar tissue as well, which is very interesting. I had a few reports of old scars that have been there since childhood for some people. A lady down the road, she had a gristly scar on her chin, and it just up and went. It vanished. DVT, deep vein thrombosis, vanished without a trace, just by increasing the circulation. You know, where do we stop?
Well, it's truly amazing, and hopefully listeners hearing this will try and spread this to everybody they know. You know, I mean, there are people who are losing their lives, losing their health, losing their income because of all these difficulties, and you know, people forget that we're not meant to be ill. You know, it isn't normal in the slightest way. You know, you look at a flock of birds or a school of fish or a herd of animals in the wild, and simply you can't tell which one's about to give birth tomorrow. You can't tell the oldest from the youngest because they're all moving at the same speed, all together at the same time. And yet humans get diseases just like any of those animals or birds or fish would do if you keep them in an unnatural environment.
Yes.
You know,
We did touch upon fertility and erectile dysfunction. And just an interesting report from a member of the family who was trying to conceive, had tried in vitro fertilization, yeah, and she'd spent quite a bit of money trying to conceive, and actually gave up. And we tilted the bed, or she tilted the bed, and she conceived without the IVF. Now, I did mention this before. Now, do the sperm need to know which way is up and which way is down? You know, is simply being on an angle sufficient to guide the semen to the egg? It is something that no one's considered.
no, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And have you heard that story quite often of conception?
No, I don't get a great deal of. I do get feedback, but are people willing to talk about their sexual activity and to someone who's really I'm not a doctor, don't profess to be a doctor. I have an engineering background. I'm hardly the person that you'd want to confide in for for something so personal.
But certainly with conception matters, the people who, the couples who really, really want to conceive, generally they will go to the ends of the earth to do it, won't they?
Well, hopefully they'll go to the end of the bed and jack it up. Yeah, but if you jack it up, my word of advice is to use these thick medical books. The more complicated, the better. And you might find that some of that will rub off. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and of course, you can buy some furniture risers. You get a pack of 4 from I've seen them on eBay for £10, including the postage. So pop 2 under your bed and pop 2 in your suitcase for when you're away from home.
So when you're propping the bed, do you normally have to prop up the middle of the bed as well?
It depends. Yeah, it depends what kind of bed they have. If there is a leg there, obviously you'll need to pack up the centre leg. Yeah. So, there's there are a couple of videos on about incline bed therapy. There's a lady called Diana Castro, and she's done a video talk about her success with a sloping bed. She had ruptured discs in her neck and in her back, and she was off work. I do believe that she's back at work now, against all the odds. There's a lady, elderly lady, that's she's been racked with pain since being hit by a motorcycle since the age of 13. She's been in excruciating pain, and when you saw this lady walking, you would imagine that she was drunk. She's in so much pain. The pain's gone. She dances. She runs. It's incredible. Yeah.
That's amazing. Gillian in the chat room is asking, are there any different angles of tilt that one should apply for any different problems, or is it always the same?
I did specify that people with a spinal cord injury would need to raise the bed higher. And the logic here is there's a guy called, I think his name's Ronald Mayer, and he did some experiments by severing the optic nerve of a fish, a frog, a mouse, a rat and a rabbit. And what he did was he showed that the fish and the frog, even though he'd severed the optic nerve the same, within a few, I think it was a few months, the optic nerve had grown back and both could see perfectly normally. But if you think about the posture of a frog and a fish, if they're lying on the side, they're generally dead. So they're always upright. So by severing the optic nerve, the angle from the brain to the eye was intact. They never interrupted the circulation. So the circulation continued and the repairs took place. Now, I'd like to think that these nerves in a spinal cord injury require exactly the same signals as saplings and seedlings from plants. In other words, they need to know which way up and which way down is for them to grow in the right direction and meet the targets. And I think this is where the main problem is with the spinal cord injury, is immediately they're placed on a flat bed, then they rotate them. Now, back to Mayer. His rat, his mouse and his rabbit, no nerve regeneration took place because they, like ourselves, were able to change posture at will. So there was never the constant direction of gravity to restore the circulation and repair the damaged nerves. With the bed on a slightly higher angle, it represented the angle of the optic nerve regeneration in the fish and the frog. And that was the logic that I came up with to apply the higher angle for a person with a spinal cord injury. And also it would apply to a person with multiple sclerosis as well. But the old 6-inch incline on a standard UK bed is a good rule of thumb. But experiment. You might find out that raising the bed a little bit higher is more beneficial to yourself. There's no hard and fast rules with this. The reason I came up with a 5-degree angle, which incidentally was the same angle that the ancient Egyptians had come up with 5,000 years ago, I used a loop of tubing, which I connected. So it was a closed loop of tubing filled with water with a little coloured salt solution at the one end, and that was stretched along the length of the bed. If I raised the bed up just a few inches, i.e. 4 inches, the salts migrated down the bed, but the return flow was in the same side of the loop of tubing, i.e. the fluid in that side of the tubing was flowing in two directions. So the down flow was on the bottom of the tube, and the return flow was above it in the same side. When we raised the bed to 5 inches, then the whole loop circulated. So we added an extra inch just to be on the safe side as a margin of error, and it seems to have been a good choice. One of the other things is injuries, broken bones. My son broke his wrist. There have been other reports as well. This guy, 82 years of age, who broke his hip, and the doom and gloom set in, with the doctors and the nurses, is because he's got diabetes. He's 82 years old, it's. But anyway, he was out of hospital in a few weeks. He said, "I'm not staying in here." His legs were swollen, and he got back on his sloping bed, and his legs went down to normal size, and he amazed the physiotherapist. And the healing at 82 years of age was something they'd never seen before. But back to my son, he broke his wrist, and he wore a plaster cast for six weeks. And he went to Torbay Hospital and had the plaster cast off, and the muscle wastage was obvious in one arm. One arm was very thin, and the other arm was normal size. And then a year later, he breaks and he has physiotherapy. He has to have physiotherapy to get his hands working. Has a lot of pain, and I think it was a couple of years later he breaks the same wrist, but this time he does a better job, straight through both bones. He has metal plates put in on his wrist, and this was the time he was actually in the recovery room, upside down, and he has the metal plates in, and plaster cast is on for 8 weeks. Well, it's sort of an open plaster cast, and that's on for 8 weeks. And he goes back to the hospital, the same hospital, and he has the plaster cast removed, and there's no muscle wastage, and he doesn't need physiotherapy. Now the surgeon there has to take the metal plates out, and he can't find the one metal plate. It's been completely overgrown by bone, and I'll quote the guy. He said in the whole of his career, he has never seen bone growth like it in his life.
Well, that's amazing. I'd like to ask you about a friend of mine who, some 35 years ago or something, fell out of a tree and broke his back.
Yes.
He's got a gap in his spine, a centimetre or two, I'm not quite sure what. Is there any chance that inclined bed therapy could help this spine?
Yes, there is. I've helped some members of the SAS with spinal cord injury, and in fact my wife and I were ringside seats at the boxing tournament at Hereford Barracks, and we were treated like royalty. And I've been helping these guys, and because their injuries were so many years ago, I forget how many years, the one guy, John Carle, was paralysed for 11 years, and he actually walked on Carlton television news, so it's in between two parallel bars, but you can see his legs moving and his feet moving. He got his bowel control back, he got his bladder control back, so he passed it on to his friends at the SAS, and this other guy, I can't mention the guy's name, but I think his injury was a similar length of time to what you've just described there. And he said, if all I get back is my dignity, I'll be very happy. He got his bowel and bladder control back after 30 odd years.
Wow. Incredible.
But of course, if we can intervene at an earlier stage and prevent these people from being on a flatbed in the first place, sky's the limit.
Yes. Well, fantastic. So, for those people listening, you were saying before we came on air that you're going to write a book, or you're in the process of writing a book.
Yes, the book title is going to be called The Gravity of Life. Yeah, hope that you like the choice of the title.
Yeah,
Uh,
very good.
it's been written a couple of
John.
times, and it, I wouldn't have done it justice. I needed to have got to this stage before I could have done the whole subject justice. Well, that's my excuse anyway. And yeah, I think it's going to be a real eye opener.
Well, hopefully it'll be a bestseller as well. When do you think that might come out?
Well, it needs to be finished this through this winter, and hopefully published in the spring.
And if people want to see more of your work, what's your website?
It's inclinebedtherapy.com.
Inclinebedtherapy.com.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We have a Facebook page as well where people are sharing what's happened to them. And you'll find, and again, it goes by the same name on Facebook, Incline Bed Therapy. We have a group and a page, and there's quite a few people there that have been sleeping on an angle bed for a long time, and they'll be willing to share their experiences. There's one lady in particular on there, um, Terry. Her name is Terry Harrison. Um, she she doesn't believe she has MS anymore. It's gone completely. Her surgeon has actually told her that she doesn't need him anymore. So that's quite that's quite remarkable. But she's there for people to talk to, yeah, amongst many other people that are trying it. The problem is you're armed with this information. You've listened to this radio station, and you'll go out there and you'll try and convince someone, and they'll just look at you as if you're daft. You know that I don't know why it is. You know, I used to chase wheelchairs and try and help people, but I stopped that a long time ago. Yeah, nobody listens.
Well, it's a great shame. I mean, the words I hear quite often are, well, if that were true, my doctor would have told me.
Yes, yes, yeah. The one I hear all the time is if it was true, then there would be clinically controlled double blinded trials, and you would have all the data by now. But actually, the people that say this have no idea what you're up against, no idea whatsoever. Yeah, you can't move these people. They're in the process of the status quo. They like the status quo, and the last thing they want to do is be made to look a fool. And a lot of them, believe me, are fools.
Well, quite. So have we covered all the things it'll do? I suspect.
No, 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 no. It, it's I just get I try and think back to what we've talked about. We've talked about scar tissue. We've talked about the immune system, especially with the Ebola. But also that same applies to people with AIDS and HIV. You know that the same problem there is a diminished immune response. So yes, there's yes, okay. There's a guy with oh, the guy's died now. That was unfortunate. But when I met him, this guy called Danny, he had months to live with leukemia, and we tilted the bed, and his blood cell count started to normalise. Now, that cross-check here, just at this point in time, is that when astronauts go into space, their white blood cell count goes up and the red blood cell count drops. So clearly, gravity is playing a role. And when we tilted this guy's bed, his his white blood cell count dropped and his red blood cell count went up, which is the exact opposite of what leukemia is. And this guy comes over from Boston, a specialist in leukemia, and he meets him, and he can't believe the changes. So anyway, um, this guy doesn't need the chemotherapy and the radiotherapy anymore. So comes back from Cornwall to Paynton, and they take his bed off him because he can't move that bed out of one area to another area. So he goes back to sleeping on a flat bed. Immediately, his blood cell count goes haywire. And this guy from Boston gets on the phone and says, "What's happened? What's changed?" So he told him about the bed. And the guy from Boston said, "It's the bed, Danny. Get that bed back on an angle." And he did, and he lived. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was like 5 or 6 years, and he was given months to live.
Wow.
So that I would suspect as well that there is a danger with the bed that it could actually increase um, the effectiveness of drugs. And again, if you take the astronauts in space, they have to increase the doses in space because the uptake while they're out there, which is the equivalent of being on a flat bed, decreases the effectiveness of the drugs. So they increase the drugs to support their immune system and whatever problems they have. And I believe that when you have the bed on an angle, the opposite occurs, and you have to think about decreasing the drugs.
Which may be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, but I have to be careful here because if a doctor's prescribing those drugs to you and you've got all your faith in that doctor, then you have to make these choices yourself, and not just on what I'm saying here, but it's quite easy to monitor whether the drugs are being more effective or not. So you decide for yourselves.
Right, very interesting. And hopefully, the people listening to this will try the inclined bed therapy method and will get back to Andrew or myself to let us know what positive results you get, because clearly.
Well, negative results as well, Clive. I'm
Yeah,
interested
sure.
in things that it doesn't work with as well.
Yeah, clearly. And we've got about 2 minutes left, and I'd just like to say that myself, I have a weekend workshop on next month, the 15th and the 16th of November, held in Wiltshire. And if anybody wanted to come to the weekend workshop, we'll be covering every aspect of physical health and also mind mastery, because clearly there's so much one can do with the power of the mind that people are unaware of. And with the raised bed therapy and all the other treatments and remedies that we know of, frankly, there's almost nothing that can't be solved. I used to think that people on dialysis with kidney problems couldn't get off, but I now realise that you can get off dialysis in not every case possibly, but in a lot of cases. And I'm going to start now. I mean, I already have been, but I'm really going to suggest to all my clients big time that every single one of them does the inclined bed, and I'll let you know what occurs.
Yeah, please. The feedback is so important. Every little bit of feedback we get means that eventually another clinical trial will be made, and when we actually get some progress in the medical profession, then these reports will be so important because anecdotal evidence, one could be deemed as a miracle, two could be a coincidence, three is just plain science.
We're at the end of the show now, so thank you so much, Andrew. My email is clive at ancientpurity.com, and if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they're very welcome. I've also got a website called ancientpurity.com and another one called healthgenius.uk. And so thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you for having me on, Clive.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your time. And that's it from us. Good night.
Good night, people.
No, that's it. I got an overrun error there, but that was great stuff, Clive.